Johnny Talk Sports in with the Week 9 college football predictions, and what a Week 8 college football gave us. The Big Ten Conference began their season last week, and for the fifth week in a row, a top 10 team was upset by a non-top 10 opponent. This time, number 8 Penn State was upset by Indiana in overtime. Indiana is one of those teams in college football that if you don't put away early in the game, they'll stick around until the end and eventually could easily strike the upset. And that is exactly what happened this past Saturday against Penn State. You could argue that Penn State beat themselves by not kneeling past the first down marker with a 21-20 lead late in the game and instead scoring the touchdown to make it an 8-point game. You got to give the Hoosiers credit, though, especially quarterback Michael Penix Jr., who really stepped up on that final drive in regulation and in overtime, scoring the 2-point conversion to send the game into overtime and the game-winning 2-point conversion. We also had some controversy last week in the Nebraska and Ohio State game with the officiating of the game, with those targeting calls against Nebraska. I counted at least 3 or 4 targeting calls that went against Nebraska that you can easily argue and say that those weren't targeting. I think a game like that, it should inspire the NCAA to really look at maybe a new targeting policy, kind of like what they do with flagrant fouls in college basketball and in the NBA, to see what type of kind of targeting it is. Like if it's really egregious, then it would be a disqualification, but if it was not egregious and if it's maybe just going for the football, then it could be just one of those. It could be one of those like targeting one penalties or something like that, where it wasn't intentional. It's just making a football play. And those 3-4 targeting calls that went against Nebraska shouldn't have been targeting, at least to me after looking at the replays of them again. But still, Ohio State dominated last week against the Huskers. And the other part of the controversy from this game was Ohio State scoring a touchdown in the last minute while up by 28 points. And I understand that maybe you could say it's not good sportsmanship, but honestly, it's not good for the integrity of a sports game, like of being a competitor. Because if you played sports growing up, whether you played football or basketball or soccer, even baseball or whatever, your coach always teaches you to play to the very end. And with Ohio State having backups in the game, it's not like the starters are still in the game. Like you had second string players in the game, maybe even third string players in the game, and they don't get much action in the game. You're just going to tell them not to score. Just think about the reps that they could be having with that opportunity. Because you just never know with college football anymore. You just never know that if a starter is going to be out for a game, then the backup's going to have to step up. And those reps that they receive will be very important. Whether if it's garbage time or if it's mop-up duty, whatever you want to call it. I just think Nebraska fans or even college football fans in general shouldn't be upset with Ohio State scoring that touchdown with less than 30 seconds left. I just think it would also be a good teaching moment for Nebraska to play better defensively. And if you honestly don't like it, you could have just stopped it. Just play better defense. Without further ado, let's get to the Week 9 college football predictions. Last week, I went 5-2, which puts me at 29-17 on the season, which is only 63% accurate so far after 8 weeks of the season, which is pretty much the halfway point of the college football season. But there is still a long way to go to get up to my goal of being 70% accurate with my college football predictions. The first matchup I will be predicting this week is the Battle of the Michigans between Michigan State and number 13 Michigan. And by the way, you can follow along with the picks I'm going to make by what you see on the thumbnail right here, or even the background as you're watching this or listening to it or even looking at it. So it's going to go from the left side first, then the right side second. So the 4 games that are on the left side, those are the first 4 games I predict, and the 3 on the right, the last 3 I predict this week. So different results for both of these teams last week. The Spartans are coming off of a double-digit loss to Rutgers and handing Rutgers their first Big Ten Conference win since 2017, while the Wolverines are coming off of a dominant win over Minnesota. Despite trailing that game early 7-0, Michigan dominated the game the rest of the way. Now, even though the Spartans did lose last week, they did pretty well defensively. They only gave up 276 total yards last week to the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, and only giving up 276 total yards of offense to your opponent. You could genuinely maybe win maybe 97-90% of games only giving up that much yardage. But what contributed to Michigan State's loss last week was the turnovers by the offense. The offense had 7 turnovers last week. And you can't turn the football over 7 times and expect to win the game. You just can't expect that. If you turn the football over 7 times in a game, you'll lose probably 99.98% of games. So, as far as my prediction is concerned for this matchup, this is a rivalry game. And in rivalry games, the unexpected could happen. In fact, we have seen quite a few unexpected moments from this rivalry matchup. And I think this game is going to be much closer than anticipated. I think if you were to put this matchup on paper, you would think that Michigan should dominate the game. But I just don't see that happening. I think Michigan State's defense is going to keep the Spartans in the game from start to finish. But I think the difference maker in the game is going to be Zach Charbonnet, the running back for Michigan. And Michigan picks up a 24-19 victory over Michigan State. I just feel like there's always 1 or 2 games every single season where the experts and all the fans think that Michigan should win pretty handily, but they have to grind it out. And I think this is one of those games where Michigan's going to have to grind it out. And I think they will with Charbonnet. Only a 24-19 victory, though, for the Wolverines. For the next matchup, we have the Memphis Tigers and the Cincinnati Bearcats. The Bearcats were dominant from start to finish last week against SMU, who has one of the best offenses in the entire country, led by quarterback Shane Buechele. They once again go up against an offense that can score points and score them in a hurry, as the Memphis Tigers are averaging 39.5 points per game, including scoring over 40 points in their last 2 matchups. What I find intriguing about this matchup are the 2 quarterbacks in this matchup. Brady White for Memphis is completing nearly 65% of his passes, along with throwing 17 touchdown passes and only 4 interceptions, and 2 of them were in one game. And for Cincinnati, Desmond Ridder is completing over 60% of his passes, while averaging over 10 yards per carry on the ground. And we got more of a glimpse of what Desmond Ridder looks like in the Cincinnati running game against SMU, carrying the ball 8 times for 179 yards and 3 touchdowns in that matchup. While Memphis does have a good offense led by quarterback Brady White, I just think that Cincinnati's defense is an underrated defense. Luke Fickell has his Cincinnati Bearcats as a well-disciplined team. I think Cincinnati picks up a 31-21 victory because, as I said a moment ago, Desmond Ridder stepped up in the Cincinnati running game last week. And last season against Memphis, Desmond Ridder had 113 rushing yards and a touchdown against Memphis last year in the AAC championship game. Because the Bearcats defense is also only allowing an average of 12.5 points per game, which is 5th in the FBS among the teams that have played at least 3 games this season. And I think once again this week, the Cincinnati Bearcats defense will be able to shut down another high-powered offense in the Memphis Tigers. Next matchup, we have the number 24th ranked Oklahoma Sooners going on the road to take on the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Oklahoma picked up a much-needed dominant performance against TCU, while the Red Raiders also picked up a big win against West Virginia last week to really boost up the confidence for the Red Raiders moving forward. We all know that Oklahoma does not do well defensively. So can the Texas Tech offense put up enough points to keep them in the game? Because if this gets to a shootout, I am just not sure how Spencer Rattler will be able to handle that, the freshman quarterback. But I don't think it will be a shootout, though. I think Oklahoma picks up a 45-23 victory because Oklahoma's dominant performance last week, I think it's going to establish some confidence with the students moving forward, and that is what you need after some subpar performances in the early weeks of the season. And you have a quarterback like Spencer Rattler that made several mistakes in the two losses to Kansas State and Iowa State this season. And I think they're just doing their best to try to get as well of a end of the season as you can. I still think the defense will give up some points, but not enough points to be concerned for this week, but possibly they need to be concerned in the later weeks, including when they take on Oklahoma State in Bedlam. We have an SEC battle, a battle between the LSU Tigers and the Auburn Tigers. Both these teams have had underachieving seasons so far, especially with LSU coming off the national championship last season. And right away, they lose to Mississippi State. They lose to Missouri. And for Auburn, well, they have been cutting it close these last few weeks, including possibly one or two games where they should have lost. A big factor in this matchup is going to be on the defenses, as both of these defenses are allowing over 400 yards a game on average. One uncertainty in this matchup is going to be who will the quarterback be for LSU this Saturday? Is it going to be Miles Brennan, who missed last week with a lower body injury, or will it be TJ Finley, who had 3 total touchdowns in Brennan's absence last week against the South Carolina Gamecocks? And I'm going to predict that Auburn, they get a 37-31 victory over LSU, while you can argue that Auburn should be 1-4. I see Bo Nix taking advantage of the lackluster LSU secondary that ranks 98th in the FBS in passing defense. Plus, it is a possibility that this game will define the rest of the season for Auburn, as Gus Malzahn is possibly on the hot seat. I think a win like this, it's going to boost up some confidence for Auburn moving forward for the rest of the season, because they have some big matchups coming up later on in the season, which includes the Iron Bowl against Alabama towards the end of the season, at the end of November. Next, we have a Big Ten showdown between the number 9 Wisconsin Badgers and the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Quarterback Graham Mertz, who we expected to have a good season after his opening act against Illinois last week, throwing 5 touchdown passes and only throwing 1 incomplete pass last week against Illinois. And it is possible that he will not be playing in this matchup, so the Badgers are already facing an uphill battle. It appears that redshirt sophomore Chase Wolf will be the starting quarterback for the Badgers this Saturday. Last week, Nebraska lost by 35 to Ohio State, as I mentioned from the top of the podcast. They held their own during the first half against Ohio State last week, including they scored an opening drive touchdown last week. So and they were able to move the ball at will against the Ohio State defense. I think if Nebraska plays with that mentality of, we may have lost by 35 last week, but that does not have to define our season. And Scott Frost is still looking for his signature win as a Nebraska head coach, because right now, so far in the career of Scott Frost at Nebraska, as the head coach, of course, the most signature win that Nebraska has is against Michigan State. And that's just because Michigan State was in the top 25 when they won 9-6. And I think there's a really good chance here that Nebraska can pull off this upset, especially if Graham Mertz is going to be playing in this game after coming off of a historic performance in Wisconsin program history as 5 touchdown passes. It ties the record in school history for Wisconsin. If Nebraska wants to pull off this upset, they have to assert the running game of their two quarterbacks in Adrian Martinez and Luke McCaffrey. And I think it's doable. I think Nebraska can assert their running game, especially with these two quarterbacks, because Wisconsin gave up 75 rushing yards on 7 carries to Illinois quarterback Brandon Peters last week. For Wisconsin to avoid being the 6th top 10 team to lose to a non-top 10 opponent in the last 6 weeks, they have to use their offensive line to set up run lanes for Garrett Groshek and Nakia Watson. So I think this game is going to be a battle of time of possession. I truthfully don't see many points being scored in this matchup. Nebraska is going to have a depleted secondary for the first half of this game, although it is quite uncertain that Graham Mertz is going to play at this point, or it's going to be Chase Wolf. But whether or not it's Mertz or Wolf, they're going to have to take advantage of the missing pieces in the Nebraska secondary in the first half of the game. Because if you can get an early lead on Nebraska, if you can get up 14-0 early, you can force Nebraska to be a pass-first offense. And Adrian Martinez hasn't done so well in recent memory in the passing game. However, I like the Huskers to pull off the upset. I think the Nebraska running game will be able to run the football more efficiently on the Wisconsin defense, not only with Martinez and McCaffrey, but also with running back Dedrick Mills, who ran for 188 yards last year against the Badgers defense. And I think Nebraska will be able to stop the run, well, not really stop it necessarily, but contain the run of Groshek and Watson and force whoever the quarterback's going to be, whether it's Mertz or Chase Wolf, to make plays down the stretch. I like the Huskers' chances if they can assert that running game, and I think they will be able to assert it, because looking at the tape from Nebraska and Ohio State, Nebraska, they appeared to move the football pretty well. Their offensive line, I think it didn't do as bad as the scoreboard entails. So I like Nebraska to pull off the upset by a score of 23-21. We have a big showdown in the Big 12 between Texas and number 6 Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State is still going strong for the Big 12's last hopes of getting into the college football playoff, while Texas is at least trying to make the 2020 season salvageable. And Tom Herman can be on the hot seat as well as Gus Malzahn. Another matchup with an intriguing quarterback battle between Sam Ehlinger for Texas and Spencer Sanders for Oklahoma State. Spencer Sanders returned last week for the Cowboys against Iowa State after missing a few weeks with a back injury, as Shane Illingsworth, the third-string quarterback, really stepped up for the Cowboys in his absence. And Oklahoma State also got Chuba Hubbard going last week. One of the best, if not the best, running back in college football. They got him going in the offense, and that makes Oklahoma State's offense more dangerous moving forward. Now, I think it's going to be a close game. Now, the Texas defense hasn't been that good this season. Oklahoma State's defense has been lights out all season. The Cowboys' defense is only giving up 12 points per game. And I think the Cowboys survive a close one in this matchup. I'm going to say 35-34. Literally a 1-point game. Oklahoma State survives. I think Tylan Wallace and Dylan Stone are going to have big games to take advantage of the Texas secondary that gives up an average of 253 yards per game. And Chuba Hubbard leads the Cowboys against the Texas defense that is also allowing an average of 130 rushing yards per game. Sometimes in college football, it's about survive and advance. And I think that's what the Cowboys are going to do in that matchup. It appears that every championship team, if you want to win a national championship, it won't be easy. You're going to have at least 1 or 2 games. We're going to have to grind it out and win the game, find a way to win. That's what's happened over the years. I mean, even LSU, for as dominant as they were last year, they still had a close game against Auburn. Clemson, they had a close game against Texas A&M 2 years ago. Only a 2-point victory. And for Oklahoma State, maybe it's 35-34 against Texas. Maybe it's a game where Spencer Sanders has to step up for the Cowboys offense and come from behind. And we have our game of the week to wrap this up. Number 3 Ohio State and number 18 Penn State. The Buckeyes are looking to show that they can compete with Clemson and Alabama as one of the more dominant teams in college football. While Penn State is looking to bounce back from their overtime heartbreak last week against Indiana. If Penn State wants to win this game, they need to contain the Ohio State running game of Master Teague, Trey Sermon, and even quarterback Justin Fields. Despite the loss, Penn State only allowed 43 rushing yards to Indiana last week. Quarterback Sean Clifford also running the football could be an equalizer in this matchup for the Nittany Lions, as Ohio State, they have a tendency to struggle with mobile quarterbacks, as Ohio State's defense had a difficult time stopping Adrian Martinez and Luke McCaffrey on the ground. So, as far as the prediction is concerned, I think Ohio State is going to win this game 35-31. I think they pick up a 4-point victory. I think Penn State's defense can keep the Nittany Lions in this game from start to finish. But I just think Ohio State will make the adjustments in the second half to pick up the decisive 35-31 victory. I think the running game of Teague and Sermon will be the difference in this matchup, as Ohio State, if they have a solid lead in the fourth quarter, which maybe it's by a touchdown, and they'll rely on the running game to kill the clock. If this game was played under normal circumstances, I would pick Penn State to pull off the upset. But with no fans in attendance, home field advantage isn't as relevant this year as it has been over the years. And it's kind of a shame that we can't get number 3 versus number 8. We can't get a top 10 matchup, but still I think this is going to be a great matchup. I just think with Micah Parsons opting out of the season, I think that's going to be a huge void for the Penn State defense. And I think Teague and Sermon will be able to run right through that front 7 for Penn State. Well, the front 7 of Penn State, as Ohio State picks up the decisive 35-31 victory. So those are my Week 9 college football predictions. Like, share, and subscribe. Comment your picks down below, and I will talk to you next time.